Please welcome Cara Buckley, climate reporter, and her guests, Manish Bapna, president of the Natural Resources Defense Council, Abigail Dillen, president of Earthjustice, and Bill McKibben, founder of Third Act.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and to you, Bill, Manish, and Abigail. So in many ways, this moment feels, perhaps at least in U.S. climate history, like very much a low point. There was this idea going into the second Trump administration that environmental groups had been through Trump 1 before. But it's not just an era of federal deregulation. It's so much more. It's so much more intense. So a huge question facing the climate movement is, what is working? Where to go from here? But before that, I want to ask each of you how much you think 2024 was a repudiation by voters of climate action. We can say the election was about inflation, but drill, baby, drill was central to Trump's message. Looking back at the election, are there regrets? Was there anywhere the climate movement went astray, or was it nowhere at all did it go astray? So, Bill, would you like to start?
I don't think the 2024 election had a thing to do with the climate. I think it was a bizarre referendum on the state of the American psyche right at the moment, and that the results that we have to live with for 4 years are already, by every opinion poll, being disapproved of at the most dramatic level by Americans now. I think it was a horrible mistake that may end up having terminal consequences for our democracy, but I don't think it had the slightest thing to do with climate. The election before was fought on climate change, and it came out very differently.
Manish?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would just very much agree that 2024 was not a referendum on climate. A lot of the polling even today shows that the public cares deeply about climate, they care deeply about clean energy, but it is true that in 2024, the things that were highest in the polls were issues around the economy, around affordability, around costs. And I do think the one thing I would say is an important lesson from 2024 for us is I think we can do a better job in connecting the dots between climate, between clean energy, and kind of the kitchen table issues that people do care about. And the good news, the good story here is that a lot of what we work on is very much directly connected to meeting people where they are. Whether it is around electricity bills, gas prices, homeowners insurance, there is a story there that we need to tell more effectively. But it is a good story to tell.
We'll circle back to that in a bit. Abigail, what do you think? So was there no missteps, do you think, in climate messaging at all?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Bill and Manish just said. And I would add that extreme weather has become the reality. It's the fastest growing demographic of people in the United States. 30 million people identify as having been directly impacted by extreme weather, whether floods or extreme heat. And I think there was a missed opportunity to meet Americans where they are in a crisis. These are problems that only government can solve. If you can't get insurance, if you can't get your house back, if your livelihood has been wrecked. And what we're not talking about enough is the way that climate is driving the cost of living crisis. And so we have to connect those dots. Drill, baby, drill. I don't think for most Americans that's about anti-climate. For them, it falls into an American dominance type of narrative. I don't think I know it wasn't a referendum on climate.
But do you think it could have been people didn't believe enough that a clean energy transition would help lift all boats or help them personally?
I don't think the case was made.
Okay.
Not at the national level. At the state and city level, you did see people running on clean energy and climate and winning. But the national discourse, the case was not prosecuted.
Democrats warned that voting to kill the Inflation Reduction Act and all the connected jobs would be political suicide, but Republicans unanimously did it anyway. Do you think there will be a political price to pay? Yes, you're nodding.
Yes.
Okay, how so, where so?
Absolutely. I mean, this might be the worst piece of legislation we have seen in decades. It is, I mean, if you just take one step back, this legislation basically is Robin Hood in reverse.
Robin Hood in reverse.
Right? You're stealing from the poor and giving to the rich. When it comes to...
do you think people care, though, like, enough?
It is going to increase, it's going to increase healthcare costs. It's going to increase energy costs. On the issues that I work on, this is a Trump energy tax. And it will be felt. And we will see the results of that in the coming months and years. Bill.
The single most interesting economic fact on planet Earth right now is the incredible surge in clean and renewable energy around the planet. The world is generating a third more power from the sun this summer than it did last summer. Right. The Trump administration is doing its best to slow down this transition in the U.S., even as it rockets around the rest of the world. If he succeeds in doing it for very much longer, then a decade hence, the U.S. will be the colonial Williamsburg of internal combustion, where foreign visitors come to gawp at how things happened in the olden times. I don't think that'll happen, because I think the pressure from the rest of the world, having to have an economy that competes with the rest of the world getting cheap energy while we're paying for expensive energy will eventually break them, and it may happen very fast. Electricity prices are already up 10% in the U.S. this year because we've got demand increases from AI while we're constricting the supply of the cheapest available energy at the same time that insurance prices, as Abby said, are going through the roof. These guys own this now. And you got a blatant display of that ownership at the UN yesterday, where the president gave what's got to be the most buffoonish speech in American history. His worldview around this stuff is based on two pillars. Climate change isn't real. And you'll get the kind of good cop version of that from Chris Wright later today. Climate change is real, but not important. That's one pillar.
Stay tuned.
And the other pillar is renewable energy doesn't work, which is, disproved every day by the emergence of China as the world's first electrostate, and B, disproved yesterday by the head of the Energy Reliability Council of Texas, who stated yet again that they'd gotten through the summer without any blackouts because they had so much solar and so many batteries on their grid. So who knows what voters think right at this moment, and it's not, I think, the right question. The question is, how does this play out in the world? And the way that it plays out in the world is that the U.S. in the last 8 months is surrendering economic, technological, and probably political primacy to China for our refusal to develop technologies that were invented in this country.
Right. And just to that point, it was like solar cells in 1954 by Bell Labs in New Jersey.
Which, by the way, the story on the front, just from my book, the story on the front page of the New York Times that day about the development of the solar cell ran on the front page directly next to a story about the first polio vaccines being administered in the U.S. So history is in a weird spin cycle right now.
It doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
That is.
But then how do you need support from more than, how do you get this to be a bipartisan issue? I mean, as we know, it's about as tribal as, it's pretty tribal right now. There's been clear links made between petrostates and authoritarianism. As you note in your book, petrostate is 50% more likely to be authoritarian. It's only a quarter as likely to transition to democratic governance. And part of the reason is the extreme wealth concentrated in fossil fuel extraction. But how do you that's a huge adversary. How do you break through in the messaging? Like, how do you break through that? How do you break that block? Is it just economics? Is it legal avenues?
Well, part of it is reality, right? So we have this...
Right, but even that's
we have this overwhelming fossil fuel first policy that is very married with authoritarianism, as you say. And that's what we're reading on the front pages every day. But the reality on the ground that we see in all of the energy forums where we make our decisions about where you actually get your electrons, that's a very different story. Clean energy is too big. It's too good to fail. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Trump Department of Transportation approving state charging plans for EVs for all the narrative that EVs have been crushed. We're still going forward to create the infrastructure to make them work for all of us. Just a week ago in West Virginia, we got a great net metering rule that's going to help people get solar on their rooftops at a great price in West Virginia. That's still happening. On Monday, the Revolution wind farm that the Trump administration tried to shut down, a judge said, no, let's keep going. And that's 1,000 union jobs, 2,500 union jobs in Rhode Island and Connecticut. Let's see even how hard the administration fights to keep it off the books. I think what we're seeing is that this industry is mature. It is the energy that pencils. And in an affordability crisis, the state regulators who have to face people whose bills are going up are going to keep choosing clean.
I can tell you a good bipartisan story.
Sure, and then we're going to jump to Manish.
Go right ahead if you want, but I'll just say.
Sure.
Here's the thing that swept Europe in the last 3 years, called balcony solar.
Right.
Millions of Europeans have put these things up. You just go to the Best Buy in Brussels, you come home with a few €100 poorer with a solar panel designed to hang over the railing of your balcony. It has a plug on the back that you plug into the wall. Often saves 20-25% of the energy that an apartment dweller uses. It's illegal.
An apartment dweller who has a balcony.
It's illegal everywhere in the United States, except that progressive bastion, the state of Utah, where the state legislature unanimously in both houses passed the enabling legislation earlier this year on the sound grounds that if something is good enough for the people of Stuttgart, it's good enough for the people of Provo. There are now the hundreds of videos on YouTube of happy Utahns installing their balcony solar, and in the last few days there have been bills introduced in New Hampshire, in Vermont, in Colorado, soon later this week in New York State to enable the same thing. Lots of people think my home is my castle, and my castle is better off if it has an independent power supply.
If I could just say a few more words, just on this point about, our climate, clean energy has become highly politicized, but it really had not been in the past, and I don't believe will actually be in the future. If you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, right, the interesting title, but 80% of the benefits, if you look at jobs and investments, went to red districts or red states. It was, but let's remember, no Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and even though they all voted against it in the reconciliation bill earlier in the year, there was significant efforts from Republicans to try to curb some of the worst excesses of what this administration wanted to do with the bill. The reality is that confronting this president, this administration on anything is political suicide. And we saw that play out in Washington very, very graphically. And I think we will actually see some of that support rebuild as we look to the future. But just to give a couple of other kind of examples, in Ohio, we are working in very red districts with unions, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the largest electrician union in the country, to actually create local support for solar projects. And what we have seen over the past 3-4 years is whereas city or municipal permitting plans would, or decisions would be 80% against building out those solar projects. We would now have flipped that number, and 80% are approving that, even in the reddest districts. Just a few weeks ago, the mid-Atlantic states, including both Republican and Democratic states, agreed to cut carbon pollution from power plants by 60 to 90% over the next 12 years. So I think it is important not to equate this very toxic discourse in Washington with what we're seeing actually happening on the ground, even in red states and districts.
Can I add one more point? I mean, you asked, what's the messaging?
Yes.
Given this effort to relegate climate to a religion, a cult, something that's even un-American.
Or like the planet is woke and must be, you know, it's sort of like there's this whole sort of underlying messaging, really. Like
Right. And the last thing that we can afford to do is allow that comms machine to discredit the most existentially important work that this country and the world has to do. And so what we know is, and I'll come back to extreme weather for a moment, people are experiencing this in, you know, we're all energy wonks, so we know we can make progress there. But in terms of messaging, we cannot ignore the fact that people are suffering from climate change right now. And we can't only talk about the efforts to make sure it doesn't get worse. We have to be talking about the responsibility of our government, of our Environmental Protection Agency, to be protecting us.
So how do you pull those levers when, you know, science is being discredited, thousands of scientists are being laid off? Like, where is your traction on this then?
You get out and organize. We just had 3 days ago.
But who's listening?
Well, we just had 3 days ago. We did this with my colleagues at Third Act and many other environmentalists across the country. We had this thing called Sunday. It was the biggest day of action for clean energy in decades in this country. There were 500 events across America with people out talking to their neighbors, talking to their local officials, talking to their state officials. That's how you do it. There's no shortcut. There's no magic way to, you know, make people change. But this story that people have to tell is incredibly powerful and beautiful. In a very dark moment in our world and in our country, we have this one big good thing happening, this sudden surge in clean energy that's big enough to take a bite out of both the climate and the authoritarianism crisis if we let it. But we do have to get behind it and push. That's why we organize.
So just to build on that, like, where do we go from here? There's still an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in Washington, right? Federally, we're pivoting from playing offense to playing defense. There's incredible work to be done in the courts and litigation, and I know Abby's going to talk a little bit more about that, but we had incredible success in litigation during the first administration. Organizations like mine, you know, sued the administration 160 times during the first administration, won 88% of the cases. Yours might even be better. But there is a lot that can be done to kind of slow down and stop a lot of the worst excesses. There's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in Congress. Perhaps the single most important thing we can do in Washington is the midterms and get pro-climate, pro-environment champions reelected so that we have some guardrails on the worst excesses. But it's also important to note that, you know, the United States is much, much bigger than Washington, D.C., and the world is much, much bigger than the United States.
Thank God.
The organizing capacity that Bill's talking about, the state work that we're seeing in California and Reggie and local, like places that Abby was mentioning, and what's happening around the world is extraordinary. Later today, 100 countries are going to be signing up for more ambitious climate targets for 2035. Like, we forget what the world is doing on climate. It is decisively moving towards a zero-carbon future. It has to happen faster. But all major economies outside of the United States is shifting in that direction quickly. And as a number of people noted, the real risk here is America might be left behind.
So both of your organizations are really, like, you're in the mud pit doing the fighting. And Abigail, you told my colleagues at the Times this isn't the usually stately tennis match of the usual switchover in administrations. This is full-on Fight Club. in which case you might be Brad Pitt, I don't know. And so, as Manish just mentioned, your group reported winning 85% of the more than 200 lawsuits it filed during the first Trump presidency. But this time, it's an utterly new landscape. The zone has been flooded, and the courts seem they're different now. The judicial system is different. So, how do you navigate that, and what do you prioritize, and what has to be deprioritized?
Well, let me say the volume and the intensity and the stakes are different. So we're not even a year in, and we already have over 150 lawsuits in process. And
you do now, and
yeah, and
right.
I can imagine
since
inauguration,
right?
And so you can imagine how those numbers are going to go up. And the tenor of the litigation is so different. There is an intentionally lawless strategy. This is not an effort to push new policy through using the laws as they exist. It's trying to bring our bedrock environmental laws and even our constitutional arrangement, our separation of powers, down. And so every fight is more consequential, both in the level of harm that's being threatened to places that we treasure, to people's health, to our future, but also to the rule of law and the whole enterprise of protecting the environment. So we're trying to be as comprehensive as we can be. I was just on a panel like this with Skye Penniman, who runs Democracy Forward, Public Citizen, A.G. Platkin, Rob Bonta and I were talking about this recently. We are all trying to be in every case we possibly can because the stakes are so high.
So what do you
across
pick,
the board?
You can't do everything.
Well, we are picking. So I'll give you an example, but we are picking places where we think if we don't get in there and try to slow them down, we'll never be able to repair the harm.
I.e., like where specifically, like what are some of the biggest things on your plate right now?
Well, the ability for a president or Congress to even act on climate. So this finding that climate change doesn't actually endanger human health and well-being is in play right now. Manish's team is doing a lot of the lead counsel work on that. I just have to call that out because it's like an iconic case, but it's across the board. It's Clean Air Act, it's Clean Water Act. It is, let me give you an example that many people don't think of as an environmental case, but I'm sure you may have read in the news, there was this unbelievably hasty, unbelievably destructive effort to build this massive ice detention center in the Everglades of Florida.
Right.
Right on top
Alligator Alcatraz.
of the place where the battle to save the Everglades began. It was one of those typical slaps in the face that this administration's very good at. The coalition around stopping that unbelievable massive industrialization is bringing diesel trucks and sewage, really a problem for the Everglades, as well as an unbelievably inhumane situation where people are getting flooded, mosquitoes, it's extreme heat.
Right.
Just the conflagration of an attack on nature and climate. In that case, which we brought on behalf of Friends of the Everglades, other lawyers too, the people behind that lawsuit spanned the entire political spectrum. Floridians love the Everglades and knew this was the wrong thing to be doing there.
But
courageous judge, you're going to ask me how we're going to do it.
Yeah, but the courageous judge. But then the appeals court basically said we're putting this shutdown on hold, right?
Well, on the ground, they're not bringing more people there. I like our chances of continuing to do well on the merits, and the administration is trying to spin this as some activist judge. No, this is a centrist person who was a prosecutor in her career. What I'm saying is there are some cases, win or lose, that you have to fight. And to Bill's earlier point, the agency that they create, the sense of agency that they create, we know this is wrong, we can fight back, we can slow it down, and we can insist on a different remedy. That's what lawsuits can do right now. So when people say, how are you going to choose? How are you going to pick your shots? I really mean it when I say we are going to file as many lawsuits as we can because they mark the fact that what is happening is lawless, and they galvanize people to keep fighting along with us. And I think it's an absolutely essential flex of democracy. The courts are working, judges are doing their jobs, attorney generals are doing their jobs. We all got to keep going to make sure that we still can go to court next year.
Manish, the NRDC is obviously involved in a lot of lawsuits, and how do you pivot? Do you have, well, first of all, do you have faith in the judicial, system? Do you feel like these are avenues that will be listened to, the outcomes, are they being listened to? Are these the strongest sort of tool in your toolkit right now?
They are, as Abby said, they are absolutely an essential part of the tools in our toolkit at the moment. And, just to give one other kind of data point, during the first Trump administration, when we were at the appellate level with Trump-appointed judges, we won more cases in front of Trump-appointed judges than we lost.
What was that about?
Because I think it is a lot more about how you choose to argue the case in ways that demonstrate whether or not they are actually about the rule of law rather than a debate about climate. And so the approach that you take, that matters deeply. And these judges, they care deeply. If you're appointed and you make your career in that profession, they care deeply about respect for the rule of law. So there is an incredible amount we can do there. It is an incredibly important tool in the toolkit. But there are other tools. The organizing that Bill has talked about, absolutely essential for the environmental movement, to reinvigorate investment and energy in doing exactly what Bill is talking about. And there is incredible work around the communications and the public engagement, what we were talking about earlier, meeting people where they are, right? So that we can actually connect the dots between this kind of global crisis and what people are feeling today. And that's going to create the energy, right, to actually move forward with clean energy climate policies. There is a number of things that need to be done in terms of litigation. I do think Congress and the midterms are an essential part of what we must focus on. The work at the local level and the organizing, the work at the state level, absolutely essential. And quite frankly, the international piece, which we're not, which is a big part of this conversation, it is about tomorrow's markets, right? If you look at vehicles, the world is shifting fast towards electric vehicles. Are American manufacturers going to be part of that future or not? So whether or not they try to protect or delay the transition within the United States, they recognize that if they want to be competitive 20 years from now, they're going to have to demonstrate the ability to make electric vehicles well. So there is a lot here, a lot of different tools in the toolkit that we have too.
So an optimistic moment, and what should regular people who aren't lawyers, who aren't environmental lawyers, how do people, how do they plug in if they feel like they need to do something? What are they doing? This is a
profoundly interesting moment. So many thanks to these guys for being in the trenches every day doing this fight. When you look at it when you back up and look at our moment, in the last 3 years, we suddenly live on a planet where the cheapest way to produce power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That is a potentially epochal moment for human civilization. We've spent 700,000 years setting things on fire. It's mostly worked, but now it's causing huge trouble, and we don't need to do it anymore. We can make a very rapid transition to a different kind of world, one, among other things, where it will be extremely difficult to fight wars over sunshine and wind. We've fought the last 100 years wars over fossil fuel more than anything else. We have a chance to move into a new world. The only place on the world where it's being actively resisted right now is the White House of the United States. They're either going to be left behind, or we're going to do our job and make the case to the American people that they want to be a part of the future too.
And so how do regular people plug into this?
The most important thing an individual can do is be a little less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make things happen. That's why we set up things like Third Act, to help people find their common voice.
And there is, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, look, there are things that they do in terms of how you choose to power your home, what kind of car you can drive, the economics of that changing rapidly. There are organizations that you could be a part of, and there's how you vote.
Right.
Right? Voting matters.
Right.
Be engaged.
And last word, Abigail.
Can I just say, we were never going to change society in the fundamental ways we have to survive and flourish in this new weather. And so we have to get into the fight. And every place matters. Your city council, your state government, internationally, there's so much to do. And I just want to give Bill a plug. I knew I was going to be on the stage with him, and I said, I think I know what his book is about, but I'm just going to read it. If you just read the introduction, it is the most beautiful distillation of what people have been working to create as a possibility over the last 30 years. It will make you feel better, and it will make you get involved.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bill, Manish, and Abigail. Thank you. Really great to chat. Lovely, lovely. Such a pleasure.